So let me welcome you all, esteemed panelists, of course, and the attendees for this National Technology Day celebrations with a panel discussion, as everybody can see, which is on AI/ML imperatives, opportunities, and threats. And now, without further ado, I will invite Professor Indranil Manna, President INA, to kindly deliver the welcome address on behalf of INA. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Colonel Rai. Good evening to all the panelists, Professor Desai, the coordinator, and the rest of the audience. It's absolutely a privilege for me to welcome you all to the National Technology Day celebration event organized by Indian National Academy of Engineering. I think all of us would agree throughout the history of human civilization, starting from when humankind converted the caves into a habitat or invented the wheel to steam engines to the era of personal computers, aeroplanes, and whatnot. Throughout this history, technology has played a very major role in offering not only amenities, but solutions to human aspirations. So it is keeping that in mind, we also have to realize that technology doesn't come on its own. It starts from the fundamentals, which we call science, and engineering plays a very important bridge to convert the exploits of fundamental science into solutions which are not only one of its kind and need not be a unique type, but of multiple type. But through the process of evolution, ultimately the most viable solution emerges as a viable technology. Now, India is poised to move from a developing nation to a developed nation in about a foreseeable future, maybe a couple of decades. And for that, engineering must play a very major role. And in this context, the Indian National Academy of Engineering, which is the only academy of engineering in this country, comprising the peers drawn from three major sources, namely the industry, academia, and R&D organizations, including the strategic sectors, plays a very pivotal role in collecting the best of the talents in engineering, grooming them, identifying them, and utilizing their talent pool to create policies and even help implementing those policies through the government or other institutions. Now, we covered the entire spectrum of engineering in 10 different engineering sections. Now, today we are going to, in today's world, technology is not necessarily as evident as it used to be a couple of decades ago. I mean, we are no longer talking about an automobile or an aeroplane or a ship and so on. Not even the computers or laptops. Today, most of the solutions that actually are going to change the face of human civilization are in a way hidden or virtual. We don't see exactly what's happening behind the scene and which is actually providing you the solution. So starting from the 1956 prognosis of Alan Turing, machine intelligence today has come to stay as and emerge as artificial intelligence. Of course, through various stages of machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, and so on and so forth. So there is both optimism, excitement, and guarded skepticism about the face of AI and its impact on the society. And we are grateful that Professor Uday Desai has taken this initiative to line up a very eminent panel of experts today to discuss what AI is going to, which way it is going to change the face of the technology in the near future, and what will be its impact and significance. So I think that's all from my side. I would again profusely thank each one of you who have joined the panel and who also are part of the audience. But at the end of this panel discussion, I would request Professor Desai to collect the important input from the panelists so that we can create a set of recommendations and the future path in which INE can perhaps move ahead and then create a policy paper and even advise the government. I will just add one more important message here, that the Council of Academies of Engineering and Technological Sciences, the CATE, the International Body of Engineering Academies throughout the world, which comprises some 40 odd countries, they have a special think tank called AI. It's purely artificial intelligence. And even the group that India INAE chairs, the working group on engineering education, has also been very keenly deliberating upon the scope and the significance of AI in engineering education. So worldwide, everybody is trying to understand what is this new development that is emerging and is going to change. So we are all ears to the panelists, very eminent panelists. And Professor Desai, kindly go ahead. I have difficulty connecting to my laptop, but I'll follow you through my cell phone. So thank you, and over to you, Professor Desai.
Okay, thanks so much, Professor Manna. So first and foremost, welcome to everybody to this interesting panel discussion that we are going to have today. This is on AI/ML, and the three components that we are looking at: imperatives of AI/ML, the opportunities that we have, and the threats. And I would say perhaps this is the hottest topic in technology today. But it is, I would say, still a bit hotter than quantum computing, though quantum computing is getting there. Okay. I would like, as I said, I would like to welcome my colleagues, the panelists who are there, as well as the audience. I think we have a sizable number, about 70 or someone odd number is logged in. I think as we go along, I'm sure a lot more people will log in. What I'll do in the beginning, I'll just give a brief introduction to the panelists, because this is a very eminent panel. And, I think it's very difficult to get people like this together on one particular platform. I think we are very fortunate, all of them giving their time out here. We have Dr. Manish Gupta, who is the director of Google Research. Okay, very short. Anyway, you can look up the details in either LinkedIn or through Google, etc. I have to say both because we have Microsoft as well as Google present in this panel. Okay. Then we have Dr. Anand Deshpande, founder and chairman of Persistence Systems. Can we do something? Otherwise, there is an echo. Colonel, can you please look into that? Yeah. My side, there is nothing, unless somebody has two instruments on. Unless, maybe everybody can mute themselves, then it's better. Then we have Dr. Rohini Srivastava. Okay. I've known her for some time. She's CTO, Microsoft India and South Asia. Okay. Then we have Mr. R. Chandrasekhar. I think it's really nice for him to give some time. His perspective will be very, very unique. Most of us are in some sense technologists. He is a former secretary IT and telecom. He is a former president of NASSCOM, co-founder and chairperson of Center for Digital Futures. We have with us Dr. Subhashish Gangopadhyay, again, a very unique person, an eminent economist in the world leading economist, founder and director at India Development Foundation. Okay, he's also a visiting professor at some of the European universities. He has been an advisor to finance minister in the rank of secretary, Government of India. So I think he brings in the perspective of the economists, the perspective of and then we get perspective of the regulators also from RC. We have Professor Vinit Balasubramaniam, a very active researcher in AI, world leading researcher, I should say. He used to head the Department of AI at IIT Hyderabad. Okay, and now of course the term was over, so he kind of continues as a professor in the computer science department doing research in the field of AI. Frankly, I wish this panel was in person in front of a live audience. I think the vibrations would have been absolutely palpable. It's just unfortunate that we could not do it in person for multiple reasons. Okay, so I guess the next best alternative is what we all have, internet, and here we are online. So once again, I'm indeed extremely thankful to them, okay, and thankful to the audience, and the audience is going to get a very unique perspective on it. The topic of AI/ML is debated across the globe. I think Professor Manna mentioned quite a few things more about technology, engineering, etc. And today being a technology, it's good to discuss a topic which is the hottest topic. A lot of debate has taken place, so one has to admit we are not the first people to talk about it. Particularly, I mean, personally, I've been involved in this for almost like 2 decades. Way back, I taught a course on ANN at IIT Bombay. But after ChatGPT, the debate really heated up, and a lot of debate is going on. So I think it's imperative, but a lot more debate is required because there are too many concerns which are still there, and too many things which are probably not quite well understood, and hopefully those will come out. So the effects, there are also, we are all aware of the positive effects. They'll come out in the discussion, but also there are a lot of not so desirable fallouts of AI. And I think it is inevitable of any new technology which enters the market. Okay. And what our objective is to understand and see what these fallouts are, and can we do something to minimize the fallout? In my opinion, you can never have zero fallout. Some fallout will be there. Okay. And we need to minimize it. So with these few words, let's hear what the panelists would have to say on impact of AI on society. How do we tackle the fallouts? And as we have worded it, imperatives, opportunities, and threats out here. Okay. So what I would request is we'll start with I'll call out the panelists and we'll start with them. If you wish, you can give a brief introduction about yourself. Okay. Otherwise, I would say, you have 5 minutes to kind of give your perspective before we get into some sort of a Q&A from my side and then the Q&A from the audience side. So, and we have only one women member in the audience, so Rohini, don't feel bad, but I'm going to ask you to lead the discussion. So, Rohini, you go first.
I was saying that I wasn't exactly looking to represent my gender here as such.
I knew I'll get it back. Thank you.
Somehow sometimes that feels like a little too much of a burden to carry. But anyway, on a more serious note, coming back to the point of technology, I think you laid the point of view quite well that indeed it is actually been working and progressing in many ways. In fact, there are several very major breakthroughs in AI that have happened before the current moment of, as you said, ChatGPT, right? I think big problems of protein folding, that is one of the most toughest problems in biology. Many years back, the work that happened in terms of AI being able to defeat humans in major games like chess. And then, of course, over the years, a lot of work that has happened on whether it's vision or language, etc. So AI has been progressing for many years. It's just that, as somebody also mentioned in the early comments, is that it's been it hasn't caught the public's imagination as I suppose ChatGPT did as a chatbot. And I guess we were all used to chatbots with the pandemic. Maybe before that, we would not have paid so much attention to chatbots. But anyway, I think having said that, I do feel that the word of generative AI is a new phase, and most people who have worked in AI research for many years ourselves have been coming to terms with this completely new phase of AI. And I think 3 ways in which this phase of AI is quite different. One, it's that we are talking to the machine in our natural language, to the model, the intelligence in our natural language, which in the past was not as straightforward. Second aspect, and of course we had language translation, but here you're talking to the model directly in your natural language. The second part, which is very interesting, rather remarkable, is the reasoning capability of the model. And many ways, the different elements of intelligence that one thinks about, reasoning is one of those where one thinks, or at least thought, that it was something that humans could do. But I think that is a very big part that the AI is able to do. And third is the multimodality. Is that the fact that the model can understand language, speech, vision, video, etc. So that completely changes the nature of how AI is, and therefore the way in which one interacts with machines, computers, broadly speaking, technology is therefore going through this serious paradigm shift. So with that in context, I think the 2 or 3 points that I would like to put out is that I think from perspective of opportunities, clearly the ability for every human being in every function industry to have an intelligent companion, to have an ability to work alongside an augmented intelligence becomes very powerful, and we are seeing that across in every part of the industry. Whether you look at the way people work in the office settings, the way in which co-pilots are getting adapted, what Microsoft calls co-pilots, but the idea is similar in terms of an augmented intelligent agent that can work with you. But if you go out into some of the very interesting cases that I'm seeing in having an intelligent agent, for example, be a specific, a very targeted tutor for every student, or a intelligent agent be for every teacher to help create specific lessons. So there are lots of very, very powerful use cases that could not have been thought about earlier. And I think the way I'm seeing also as I work with customers is while AI is the sort of the target or the North Star to go after, I think people are starting to realize that data is what makes AI work. And not just the data for training the model, but actually helping the model interpret data. Because if you think about, let's say, lawyers who have to look at thousands and thousands of documents on prior legal cases, etc., all of that, those documents and information, AI is able to help you glean through very, very quickly. And therefore, that ability to have that data information in a way that AI can work on becomes very, very important. So therefore, what I'm seeing in the industry is, while AI is getting infused into products, but people understanding that the way they can leverage this technology to really drive value is to make sure that their data estates are in shape, they are scalable, and they are in a way that one can draw intelligence from. And the last point is that of being able to trust the technology. Because of course the ideas of hallucinations and everything has caught people's headlines, but I think there are technology. At the end of the day, it is algorithms, it is mathematics, it is a way of being able to understand how this works. So therefore, being able to bring the elements of trust, bring the elements of safety into AI is areas where a lot of organizations tech leaders around the world are investing time in, to ensure that while this technology is powerful to derive the positive benefits, the ability to ring fence the models, the ability to create content safety, the ability to create safeguards, and ground these models, the term called grounding, on data that you can trust, is a way in which one thinks about getting the best of this technology. So I'll pause with that. I think as some initial remarks, I'm sure we'll have more discussion along these.
Okay, thank you so very much. I think you have set the stage and talked about various things. We can come back to it. So I would request now Anand to go ahead. Anand, the floor is all yours. Would you like to make a presentation, Anand? You mentioned, great. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, and we can see the slides.
Okay,
perfect.
so I'm going to make a very short few comments on how AI is going to disrupt programming. And in this context, I want to say that, in terms of what is possible with AI, really sky is the limit. And you can watch around all the apps that are getting created. And clearly there is amazing amount of traction and lots of activity in AI. When you look long term, I would really like the point of view that Vinod Khosla has, where he predicted what can happen in terms of AI doing amazing things over the next 10 to 25 years. And the list is quite nice. And, these are quite amazing in the sense that if these happen, and I believe that they will happen, they will really transform the world in many different ways. So for example, AI being able to provide free tutors and for every child, doctors and lawyers at every citizen, professional expertise at 10x, affordable access to these kinds of technologies. Lots of programmers who can do many things without writing code. So coding is going to become democratized. Because of AI and various technologies, he talks a lot about the billion bipedal robots, talks about majority of cars becoming autonomous, music and entertainment industry becoming very personalized, and also consumer access could be for access to the internet could be agent based, which could also change many different kinds of things. He also talks about materials, gas, and travel. So all over the place, he shows many different examples which seem very plausible and quite exciting in terms of the prospects of AI that we can see as we look ahead. And of course, he also points out a few areas of caution that can hold us back. But by and large, it seems quite believable that in the next 20 years or so, AI will transform the world as we know it in a very big way. Now, when it comes down to more mundane or more now things, today's stuff, I think what I'd like to tell the programmers is that it's not the AI, it is individuals with AI who are disrupting those without AI. So it's not like AI is going to disrupt any programmers. It's programmers who understand AI are the ones who are going to disrupt those who don't have access to or do not figure out AI. And in this, this is not a really scientific chart here at all, but this is my opinion. Is what I have found in general is that when you start using AI or ChatGPT or anything else, for a short period, you might feel like your productivity is a little better. You can do simple things well, and you can give the document to clean up and do some sorting, summarization, and a bunch of things. So that works out well. But once you get a little bit beyond that and start to get bold, in fact, the productivity actually drops down below zero. So you can't, if you really want the chatbot to do something meaningful or you want the copilot to do something really useful, then in the beginning it seems very hard because the amount of work you have to do to get it to be useful is actually more than it would be much easier to write your own mail than to have copilot write your mail in some sense. So a lot of this stuff really takes a lot of time and toll, and you may not get as good productivity in the first few if you're just trying it out or just have some idea but you don't know enough about it. Now, when you get into this level 5 level that I have defined here, this is where the copilot kind of stuff is there, which can help you get better. And you will see improvement because, automation is put in there in place that has packaged it well for you and you can do something more now. But, when you get to the pro and expert category where you start to see exponential gains, that is when you will find that, the super programmers are so much better because it's like having hundreds of monkeys together to work for you. And if you think through this analogy and you have hundreds of monkeys who can be available to you, if you have few monkeys and you don't know how to get them to work for you, then these 100 monkeys will drive you nuts. And that's what happens if you are not well, like if you don't spend enough time in trying to become an expert at this. So my comment here is that yes, AI is going to be there, and people with AI are going to disrupt those who don't have AI. But those who want to really disrupt other people need to get better and become an expert at AI rather than just be a charlatan or a dilettante in some sense. So that's my point here. And this is true for most technologies as well, meaning when you start out and if you don't invest enough time in technology, then it's much harder and more painful to use it. And AI will not solve everybody's problems unless you can think through it hard enough. But if you can get to be the expert category of AI, then the programmer productivity or the technology improvements that you can see are so phenomenal that they will completely outshadow everyone else in the early stage of that expertise. So my appeal to everyone here is that yes, AI can be very effective, but you need to get good at it and not just play around with it. The other thing that I've been trying to think through and I find is that there'll be a lot of work for people to use AI because I think AI is not going to be like scuba diving. It won't be like you can go pick up the gear and just go jump in the ocean. It's going to be more like skydiving. So you will need a coach and a guide to go with you if you want to get meaningful work done at mission critical level or commercial level. And yeah, of course you can play games with it, but if you want to get some real serious things done, then it's going to be like skydiving and you will have an opportunity to guide people who are not experts because the experts will be able to do it. And those who are thinking that, I'm going to just pick up AI and just go scuba diving, I don't believe that's going to be the case. Again, these are all provocative statements meant to excite and to get people to think about it. The reality is that everyone will have AI, and if you are a programmer, you are better off, in life than someone who is not a programmer. Because after all, if you have AI and you need to be an expert at AI, then a programmer has a better chance of becoming an expert AI programmer than a non-programmer. So to that extent, I think if you are a programmer, instead of complaining or thinking a whole lot about what will AI do to my job, my suggestion here is that you should work hard and get better. And if you are the expert, then you have the ability to basically outrun everyone else who's not an expert. I just want to finish with this last quote here that says, this is a little bit of trying to put guards here. This is a Bill Gates quote who says that most people overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. So the point he's trying to make is that the Vinod Khosla type things will definitely happen, and they will happen faster than Vinod Khosla thinks it can happen. But the disruption that we have been saying will happen in 1 year, or the destruction of the industry in 1 year may not take 1 year, it might take a little longer. With this, I'll stop here and we can take this further for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anand. I think you have laid the whole thing, and it kind of complements, a different perspective compared to what Rohini was talking about. I really appreciate it. I think next we'll go with, and the ordering is nothing special. I'm just picking some names, in the generic order. So we'll go with Manish.
Sure.
Floor is all yours, Manish.
Sure. Thanks, Uday. So I think Rohini and Anand have already set the stage well. AI is going to be a very transformative force, which has that potential to pretty much change everything on the planet, and in that process, positively impact billions of lives. So what I'm going to do is share some of our work at looking at kind of how we so how do we make sure that the benefits really do accrue to everybody on the planet, right? And we don't further exacerbate that divide between digital haves and have-nots. So I'll start with this example of what, let's say today, a multimodal model like Gemini is able to. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. It's a little fine. That's all. The fonts are a little small. That's all.
Hard to read, but you can see it.
Okay. Yeah. So this is, a cherry-picked example, but still the fact that kind of the model is given this particular prompt, which is a combination of text and this diagram, and it is told, and this is that kind of well-known kind of a question, right, where you have somebody sliding down the slope, and you want to basically tell what would be the speed of this skier, right, at the bottom of the slope. And this is that, again, question where you convert that potential energy into kinetic energy and so on. And the model is asked, okay, here's a solution by a student, and tell me, did the student get the correct answer or not? And if not, what was wrong with the answer? And the model comes back with this response, where it is indeed able to infer that, yes, you were trying to solve this problem of converting potential energy into kinetic energy and so on, and where you went wrong. So again, the implications of this kind of capability, right? You can imagine now on a personalized tutor, if every learner has access to this kind of capability, it can be a game changer in allowing them to learn. But there is still, unfortunately, a very significant gap. So for instance, if you look at kind of even models like Gemini, so although my team is hard at work trying to make sure, and in fact, the latest version of Gemini L++ model that has just been trained, it's not out in production yet. Our team has helped it understand now over 400 languages, up from about 100 languages that it understood. Still, the gap between the capabilities of these kinds of models on English and then on Indian languages like Hindi, and then the gap becomes even wider when you consider other languages like Gujarati, Tamil, Bengali, and so on. So our team has been kind of really looking at how do we improve how do we develop AI in a manner that is able to democratize that access to information? So any native speaker, not just in India, ultimately in any part of the world, they're able to have the same kind of information access as the native English speaker. Then, of course, there are areas like agriculture that have so far been untouched. So let me maybe start very quickly, give you a flavor of the kind of work we've been doing. So about 3 years ago, our team built Mural, which at that time provided the largest coverage of Indian languages, 16 Indian languages plus English. And they saw for both native text and more so for transliterated text, you could significantly improve kind of the capabilities. So for instance, now if in Marathi or in Bengali or in Gujarati, you have these statements that the user makes, which are different ways of telling the system to set an alarm, as a result of this model, the system is able to understand the user intent and convert this statement into a call to an API, create an alarm with the following whatever date and time. And we also made this model freely available to the research community. And in fact, it has been downloaded over 16,000 times. I asked the team then to kind of make sure that we expand beyond those 16 languages. And my initial thought was, let's make sure we can cover all 22 scheduled languages of India. And I was very happy to see again Partha Talukdar, who leads that effort, come back and said, look, you're not being ambitious enough. So he did this analysis that there are 60 Indian languages which have over 1 million speakers and 125 languages which have over 1 lakh speakers each. So he set about this target of building a model that they call Morni that would understand all of those 125 languages. So this is, again, very, very ambitious, and it's easier said than done, because if you look at those 125 languages, 72 out of those 125 languages are zero corpus languages. That is, there is zero known digital data. And as Rohini was pointing out earlier, right, AI really needs data as the fuel, right, for you to build those models. So we embarked on this project called Vani together with Indian Institute of Science to start collecting speech data from the various districts of India. And unlike a language anchored approach, this time we took a region anchored approach where we go to, again, a region. I mean, any village that we go to, we describe that image and we ask people to describe that image in their own favorite language, and then tell us what language they've just spoken in. And in that process, we've already started to collect the first ever data for certain languages that we knew about. And we have made data from the first phase openly available to all researchers, practitioners, and so on. And through the Government of India Bhashini program, our goal, we are in the middle of phase 2. Our goal by the end of phase 3 is to collect data from each and every one of the 773 districts of India. And so one obvious question that arises is then, once you build, let's say, such a model, that model understands Indian languages very well, but then you have all these other models like Gemini, which have a much better understanding of the overall world knowledge. And I showed you earlier, right, like one example of a capability of Gemini. So the question in our mind was, how do we make sure we combine the overall amazing capabilities of a model like Gemini with the Indian language capabilities of a model like Morni? So our team came up with this approach called CALM to automatically compose 2 large language models. And in fact, that work just got presented at the ICLR conference earlier this week. So I, in the interest of time, I won't cover some of the other kind of areas where we are trying to bridge this divide, but I just want to leave finally with also kind of a note of caution that there are also a lot of outstanding challenges, right? Rohini mentioned the problem of hallucination. There's this problem of bias, because a lot of language models today have a strong bias. I mean, there was a study done by folks from IIT Madras when they took some of these legal cases and they got these current LLMs to kind of to advise on that legal case. And if the name was Hari, and the question was posed to the LLM describing that case history, and the question was posed, should Hari get a bail? The model says yes, Hari should get a bail. And if the name was changed to Abdul, should Abdul get a bail? The model says no, Abdul shouldn't get a bail because he's at a risk, right, of committing all of these offenses. So how do you really make sure that these models do not perpetuate some of these biases, right, that we carry as humans? So that's a huge issue. And what we have seen is sometimes even when the language-based models are doing better, if you ask them to create images, in multimodal models, we see much more, much higher levels of bias. So again, that's a very active area of research where our team has also been contributing benchmarks and kind of trying to conform to these Google's AI principles. And many companies are now beginning to adopt these kinds of principles and try and make sure that their products abide by these principles. But I'll say that today it's still an open, an active research area, right, for us to be able to, in fact, build our models in a manner that they abide by these principles. So with that, let me stop and pass it back to you.
Oh, thanks, Manish. Thanks a lot, because I think you brought up all the interesting work that you're doing and the corpus. I have some questions, the data part of it. I'll come back to you. Okay, so I think we'll move on now. RC, the floor is all yours. Now you can throw some light and say things which perhaps the techies don't know about.
Yeah. Thanks, Uday. I am not sure that I can throw light on what all the tech wizards who have preceded me have done, but maybe a slightly different perspective. So I think we have heard from the panelists, and in general, it's clear that the opportunities and threats are both massive and widely recognized. So I would like to focus on the imperatives and do so from an India perspective. And I think that the imperatives for government, for the business, that is IT and ITES industry and businesses, and for civil society are all a little bit different. And of course, when I refer to AI, I'm referring to the entire family, including machine learning, deep learning, and intelligent robots, and so on. So from a government perspective, I do think that the challenge is to design policies and programs that direct the power of AI towards some of the most pressing developmental problems that we face, such as education, healthcare, livelihoods, etc., in which the role of the state is high. So while the potential opportunities have been recognized, the current reality is that the impact on the ground is minimal. And both the actual strategy and the game plan are not yet there. So I think it's important to recognize that these technologies can and will completely transform the entire ecosystem, a point I think which was referred to by the earlier speakers as well. Not only in these areas, but in other areas such as agriculture, where the bulk of Indians are still employed. But the time has also come to ask some fundamental and far-reaching questions regarding the post-AI scenario. So whether it happens in 1 year or 10 years, the consequences are so immense that the time to start thinking is right now. So, for example, how do we use these technologies in a way that makes the education system cheaper and yet more effective? And I am referring more to the school education in this context. And a more profound question is how we actually look at even the education system and its goals in the future. Because today it takes nearly 25 years of education and knowledge acquisition for an individual to actually become a doctor, and maybe a trifle less for an engineer. So there are limits to how much this can be speeded up given the limitations of the human body and mind. But with today's technology, all the requisite knowledge can be acquired by a computer system in hours rather than years. So since cumulative knowledge is doubling every 18 to 24 months, the mismatch between humans and AI is only going to increase rapidly. So the question is, will it be necessary or even possible to learn in the same way and work in the same way as AI becomes more and more powerful? That's something to think about. I believe clearly not. And I think that this is not a modern variant of the why learn maths when you have calculators question. It's something much deeper. Instead, I think we must ask, and that resonates with what the earlier speakers were saying, that how do we equip young people to use AI as an extension of themselves? Because they are going to be surrounded by AI. So how do we train them to use AI as an extension of themselves and become knowledgeable and productive much faster? And similar thought process can be applied to healthcare and agriculture and so on. But there is another aspect, which is an orthogonal dimension, which is how do we assimilate and leverage AI while simultaneously creating jobs instead of losing them? This is particularly important given India's demographics. Can we, for example, rethink the entire healthcare delivery system to enable existing workers to be bumped up one level in terms of competency? Village health workers functioning at the level of nurses, nurses functioning at the level of doctors, doctors as specialists, all supported and enabled by AI. And to supplement that, can we add a host of front-end unskilled workers who function as the village health workers do today, using AI and at the same time providing a human touch, because that is something which is valued by every individual. So this combination provides a human touch at the front end while effectively countering the digital divide. That's something which was seen to be very effective when we had the community service centers. And today, more than 1 million people are employed, and they find employment just providing a physical front end, or what today is called the phygital model. So it bridges the digital divide and provides employment. So tens of millions of youths, I believe, could be gainfully employed in this manner if we start thinking of different sectors and how they will get transformed with AI. And I believe that these kind of creative policy approaches are needed in key sectors. The other imperative, I think, for the government is regulation. How do we strike the right balance between curbing the harm, which was referred to, whether it is deepfakes or bias or sophisticated frauds or deliberate misinformation or manipulation of people for commercial and political gain, while at the same time allowing room for private enterprises to create innovative technologies and business models. So can we learn something from the experiments which have already happened elsewhere in the world, whether it's in Europe or in US or in China, which have brought in regulations tailored to their needs? And so we have to think through based on our needs: the European Data Act, the AI Acts, China's control on recommendation algorithms and deep synthesis, and US regulations are some of the kinds of examples we need to look at. But our own needs are unique in some ways. We have a very strong IT and ITES industry, which is very highly proficient in implementing tech solutions, including cloud and AI-based solutions. But creating new technologies and products has not been our forte so far. And I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone here, but I'm just making a more of a statistical observation. There have been individuals who may have done it. In fact, if you see, according to the AI Index 2024 annual report published by Stanford University last month, April, 61 notable AI models originated from US-based institutions, far ahead of European Union's 21 and China's 15. Question is, where is India? Even Egypt and UAE accounted for 2 each, while India is hardly represented. So clearly, there's a huge gap there, and we must do what we need to do to at least be serious players in the game. So additionally, the question is, can we leverage AI along with our established strengths like the IT industry and extend the industry's global footprint while continuing to work on our own gap areas? Can we be seen as the globe's leading solution provider that leverages AI while adding business and tech innovations to tailor solutions to local needs? So let me come to the imperatives for another key stakeholder, which is civil society. We, I believe, have a dearth of organizations with the requisite expertise looking at issues like how the adoption of advanced technologies, particularly AI, is impacting our economy and society. Can they become effective watchdogs, such bodies, to guard against creeping surveillance capitalism or expanding government intrusion into digital lives, or some combination of the two? Advanced societies have many such bodies which are funded by philanthropic foundations. But we have very few such bodies and barely any domestic trusts or foundations that fund such work. I think it's dangerous for a country like India to have its civil society organizations in this critical area depend mainly or entirely on foreign funding. And I hope that some of our major domestic philanthropies, especially those funded by technology-created wealth, are listening. And the good news is that this kind of work needs really minuscule funding as a proportion of their overall spending. But its impact could be really profound and far-reaching. Finally, I would just say that, I think we are all witnessing the incredible and accelerating pace of development of AI and all its variants. So the imperatives are not just important, they are, I believe, urgent as well. And I hope we will have more opportunity to continue discussion of all these points. So thank you. At this point, let me stop here.
Thanks, RC. I think you have brought out a lot of the India perspective. I think it's quite unique, and I'm especially appreciative of that. I think we'll move on to Subhashish. Oh, Subhashish, don't turn your video off. I was just coming to you. So, can you turn your video on, Subhashish? So, we would like your perspective. We can take 4-5 minutes. You bring the very unique thing, economics. Normally, in most of the panels, discussion, debate, discussion I've been there, I've never seen an economist present a perspective. Even in G20, where I was involved, there was no economist. So I would really appreciate if you can come from that angle and say what role AI is going to play on global economy. Is it going to create havoc or whatever? I'll leave it up to you. Please go ahead.
You should never tempt an economist. and on top of that, a Bengali economist. Speak about everything under the sun. So you see, the thing is that there is a lot of issues that have been raised, both locally as well as globally. And since RC ended with civil society, I must say that in particular by the civil society against AI. That is not all wrong. But I think the first thing we should look at, as an economist from the Indian context, I look at AI as some of the gaps that they can fill. In India, the supply of skilled labor or the availability of skilled labor in very specific skills is quite low. For example, if I look at the health sector, there are about 300 skills in the health sector, and we train people for maybe 20-25 of them. The remainder people learn on the job. Let's take diagnostics. A little bit of study that I did, within that field, there are so many things that AI can do, and we have so few diagnostic service providers. And therefore, these are some of the good things that AI can do for us. It will not substitute labor. Indeed, it will fill a gap of the important human capital that we do not have at the moment. And it will take years to build that up. Number two, even when we try to build that up, as we saw with nurses and doctors, the moment they get through, they're either in the US or in Australia or in the UK. When I looked at the COVID data, 64% of the NHS doctors were from India who was working in the UK. So, so one way probably to address this, lack of people per capita in almost every indicator that we see can be addressed by AI. So that is one good thing. Same with, RC mentioned agriculture, and there was somebody else who also mentioned agriculture. Now, the ability to do credit risk management, with AI, hugely reduces the cost and the type of information that need to be collected. So, so there are very many uses of AI in the economic ecosystem that one can think of, especially in the Indian context. Now, what is the flip side of it? The flip side of it, if you talk to most businesses, while they say that yes, climate change and this and that, which is all true, can be addressed by AI, many of the issues there can be addressed by AI. What they're finally ending up doing is using AI to replace labor. And given that in India, employment is an issue, that is something to think about. So if we are looking at it from the Indian side, much of the business that RC was hoping Indian businesses will do, they're mostly trying to use AI to substitute labor in India. And by the way, this is not an Indian business, this is globally also that is happening. Why? Because AI increases productivity, and this one of the important, even the way productivity is measured, right? One of the important things is that how much less labor can you use to produce the same output or same revenue in dollars or rupees. So that's where the economics comes in, really. Otherwise, everything is hunky-dory with AI, and should be, because it's a new progressive technology. But these are the things that we have to be careful about. And here, two things that have already been said I want to talk about. First is the role of businesses and government, but second is the role of us, right? Because we also are party to this. We have to also, address these issues. And I go back to something that I did long ago in the mid-80s, very long ago, where when Malaysia introduced reservation for local Malays. Now, when they introduced that, after a few years, it was found that the wage gap between the Chinese Malays and the local Malays actually widened. Right? Now, the study that I did was essentially to explain this. How could this happen? That with reservation, the wage gap, instead of falling, has actually widened. And the answer is very simple, actually. And many of the AI issues that are coming up are similar in nature. So if I'm a Chinese employer and a Malay employee or potential applicant applies, my first thought would be that this fellow is so bad that he can't even get a job in the sector where his job is reserved for him. And the Malayan employee similarly will never employ a Chinese now, but is similarly thinking, Abhi jayega kahan? Has to come here na, so I can reduce my wages. And that is exactly what was happening. This is how the model was, how we were training our intelligence, right? After all, we are the ones who are writing the algorithm for this. So all the discrimination and biases that were being discussed, this is precisely the way they come. Now, this is not to blame statistics, because what I did in the mid-80s was using statistics. The people who are employing labor or not employing labor are also using statistics, right? Because they're looking at the past and then they're extrapolating, they're using the data, and hence they're making those decisions. AI has the same problem on a much larger scale. So we should not use those things as a negative of AI. Instead, we should try and ensure how we can use our own native intelligence to address these problems so that they don't happen, right? So that is what I would say when it comes to AI. But now, talking about the AI discoveries, now I'm going to talk a little bit about regulation. Now, one of the things that was noticed, and there was actually a case, and therefore there's a lot of writing in the economics literature on this, that does AI or algorithms, right, actually help or distort competition? And I'm sure that many of you, all technologists, you must have seen that there was this book written by somebody, I forget who essentially wrote a book about the growth of a fly from an egg through its larva stage into a fly. So he was a bioscientist, and he wrote about this. That book was on Amazon, and it was selling for more than $1 million. And how did that happen? That is how algorithms work, right? So two of them, one was a very well-known supplier of books, right? And therefore, this is in the early days of algorithmic pricing. So that publisher or that seller wanted to get some premium on the brand because its name was a good brand name. So it said that whatever is the highest price, do a markup on that, a small markup on that. Because when the brand sells, we look for the same reason why the rack rate in an hotel, when you look at the pricing of an hotel, you may get it at 20%, 25% discount when you make the call. But on the web or on their page, they will always write the high rate. Why? Because if the cost of a hotel in India is 10,000 rupees a night, and in the same city, another hotel is charging 5,000 rupees a night, you know that it is not cheap. It also means that it has less facilities. Maybe the 10,000 is a 5-star, the 5,000 is not a 5-star. So these rack rates also convey information for the hotel. So that is what this guy was doing, or this publisher was doing, a markup on the highest price. Another publisher was following this, and in its algorithm, it had written a little bit less than the highest price to undercut the highest price wala. But the problem is that the little bit less was more than the little bit more that they had chosen. If I say up it by 2%, the other guy says down it by 1%. So the net effect was an increase in price. And that just spiraled up all the way for the price to go up to $1 million. It's very well documented, this entire story. Now, so the question that economists are asking, does Trivago or Book My Trip or Make My Trip, are they actually helping competition or helping prices to be up? Why? Because my algorithm says that Uday's hotel has reduced price by 10%. My algorithm immediately matches it. So Uday's ability to get a new customer before I realize that he has taken approach. And therefore, there is a lot of literature, and there was an actual case in
Colonel, are you able to hear me? My problem or?
I'm able to hear you, sir, but I think we have lost.
Colonel, are you able to hear me?
I'm able to hear you, sir.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Subhashish is.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
I'm
just
back.
briefly lost him.
Yeah. So I'm saying, since I've taken up a lot of time, maybe, so let me quickly finish it off by saying that there was actually a case which was fought in the US in Martha's Vineyard of exactly the same thing, of why, if I don't have that in-between time within which I'm going to reap the benefits of undercutting, if I don't have that time, then competition doesn't happen. So I know that the algorithm, and if we're using the same algorithm, then I know that as soon as I raise my price, forget about lowering my price. If I raise my price, others will raise too. And that so-called, what we call tacit collusion, or monopolizing the market, which is happening with big tech, unfortunately, right, a lot. Those are the issues that we as economists are concerned with. But here, I think the approach should not be to, put up guardrails, to put up hurdles for the AI development, because indeed, India has to develop its own AI, as many of you already talked about what you're trying to do in the Indian context, generating the artificial intelligence in the Indian context. So but the important thing is that we have to be aware of the consequences. Rather than trying to bring in processes that prevent the AI from developing, we have to try and ensure the guardrails on the consequences. That something will happen if this happens. Therefore, it's your responsibility, since you know most about the technology. You are developing the technology. Therefore, you should take care of it. Instead of we, outsiders, trying to get into the process and signal how to develop the technology. I think that is something that we must be careful about, because the stage now is too new. We have no clue how it is going to develop. So instead of trying to get in who are not in this business, trying to get in and say how to do it would be a dangerous proposition. That's what I would say. I would say look at the outcomes. Make sure that the outcomes are addressed.
Great. So that's really nice, a very unique perspective. We'll just get back to you. I think we'll move on to Vineet. Vineet, are you able to now share? Oh, good. You're able to share your presentation.
I hope my
Yes,
slides
we
are-
can see. We can see it. Yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me and the opportunity here. And so I'm going to look at an academician's perspective to the full space. I think we've heard a wide variety of perspectives. I thought I'd look at it from where I stand as an academic in this space. Is what can we really learn from what AI has gone through for the last few decades to see where it's going and what can we do about it? I think that's perhaps the perspective that I thought I could bring to the discussion today. So the history of AI is quite old. I mean, in fact, one could argue that the history of AI is older than computer science itself. I mean, because the computational modeling of a neuron probably started a few years before Turing came up with the formal model of a computer. So it started way back in the 1940s. Then, in fact, the earliest chatbot was Elisa. It was in 1965. I mean, we are still celebrating chatbots at this point in time, but the earliest chatbots were way back in the 1960s. We had the first neural network, which is what constitutes deep learning today, way back in the 1950s. We had expert systems in the 1970s. We had logic and all of the symbolic AI coming in the 1970s. And of course, since the 1980s is when machine learning came formally into the stream, and that took off significantly towards the 80s and 90s. Then, of course, towards the late part of the first decade of the 21st century, deep learning really took off. And the last 10 to 15 years has been all about deep learning in the history of AI. So if you actually see the history itself, you'll actually see that AI had three upswings, right? It had one in the 50s, 60s, one in the 80s, and the one that we are going through at this point in time, right? So in some sense, it looks like third time is the charm here. But the part that I wanted to talk about a little bit more was what can we learn from the history of AI and where do we seem to be going with all of this, and what could that tell us about the imperative opportunities and threats ahead of us? In terms of what is ahead of us, one nice analogy to see this is to look at what Deep Blue was a couple of decades ago. For most of us, I'm quite sure have heard about IBM's Deep Blue. That was the chess playing system that was developed in the 1990s. And then we had the DeepMind's AlphaZero that came a few years ago. So if you actually observed, what's the key difference? One could argue that what did we really achieve in 20 years? Because we played chess in the late 1990s and that Deep Blue system beat Kasparov. And then once again, we had AlphaZero, which beat Stockfish and pretty much all chess players in the last few years. So if you asked what changed, there was actually a very critical element that was different, which is maybe what I have on the left side of the slide here, which is in cognitive psychology, the way information is processed, one theory towards it is perception, cognition, and action, and that forms a feedback loop. We first perceive, that is, we see the scene around us, we hear some noises, then we cognize the scene, we realize there are people here, people are talking, we hear somebody make sense of their words, so on and so forth. And based on cognition, we act and manipulate the environment. And manipulating the environment has to be resensed, again, reperceived, recognized, and this goes on as a loop. So when we had Deep Blue in the 90s, which actually beat Kasparov on chess at that point in time, you'll have to look at it and notice that that system had no clue of what a white square was and a black square was. It played chess in terms of symbols. Somebody told that the rook was in G5, or you had a position like N5, G7, or G5, N6, or things like that. And everything was played on that configuration of spaces. To some extent, which would be a cognitive way of solving AI. To some extent, what that system had achieved at that point was a cognitive view of the entire information processing pipeline. And that was perhaps a reason why that really did not take off into consumer applications. It was an esoteric application that was a niche at that point in time. It really did not take off into consumer applications. But what AlphaZero did a few years ago was to put things in the right pipeline. First do perception. AlphaZero actually learned to play chess completely from scratch by even perceiving and understanding the white squares, black squares, and all the pieces on the board, and then playing the moves and doing the cognition. So putting things in sequence to first solve perception, then solve cognition, and then of course act on it was a critical difference between the success of Deep Blue in the 1990s and AlphaZero in around 2018 or so. Now the obvious question, or now what does it tell us about where AI is headed, is it should be very straightforward to see now where we are going with all of this. The success of deep learning in the last 10-15 years, or AI/ML if you could say for the last 10-15 years, has been in perception. Historically, I work in computer vision, historically, even recognizing an object has been a pretty difficult task for AI researchers for decades together. But what has changed in the last few years is these building blocks, like detecting an object or detecting a mask around an object, have become very, very easy to do. Or detecting a syllable in speech or understanding a word in a text have become very, very easy to do. And all of this are perception tasks in terms of humans. So where are we going next? Obviously cognition, right? Trying to put these perceptive pieces together and reasoning and trying to see how they influence human decision making more closely. And we are already seeing that happen. We talked about, I think, the ethics of AI. We talked about, I think, fairness. There were quite a few comments around those things. All of those relate to human cognition. So one thing that this tells us is the future of AI is going to obviously try to automate the cognition piece of this information processing pipeline. And eventually, perhaps even the action or the manipulation piece, which is still, you could call that agents, you could call that robotics. Maybe they are two instantiations of actions, but trying to envision different variations of how AI can influence manipulating of an environment is perhaps where the next wave of AI could go. So another way of seeing all of this is also that I think over the last couple of decades, of course, it's been efforts of several decades, but over the last decade or so, the core AI/ML piece, I think this has been alluded to by a few speakers before too, is the core AI/ML piece has got a lot in place done. Right? There is a lot of more research to do. There are many other algorithmic ways of approaching the problems, which are still being researched on, or theoretical guarantees, so on and so forth. But a lot of the pieces have come into the core AI/ML piece. And if we see the last 5-6 years of where AI has been, it's been on the periphery of this chart, if I can say so. On one hand, it's about how AI interacts with other technologies, could be hardware like embedded AI or things like that. People have been talking about quantum AI. There are a few initiatives around that, but that's not taken off from a consumer perspective. Or even AI looking at smart materials or drug discovery, trying to put AI into the context of other science and technology paradigms. That's perhaps one direction where a lot of effort has been going on in the last few years. And also on the other side, on how AI interacts with humans. That's where things like explainability of AI models, robustness of AI models, fairness of AI models, ethics of AI models, or just HCI, human-computer interaction more broadly, has largely taken off in the last 4 or 5 years. If you see, the core of AI research today is actually got closer to the technology-human interface than it was a few years ago. And this is something perhaps very important to notice when we talk about where we are going with all of this. I do have a few comments to talk about what we can do in terms of imperatives and opportunities. I'll come there in a moment. But before I get there, just one last point on this is, I think you could also view AI as a journey to understanding intelligence itself. I mean, in some sense, AI is human civilization's tool to understand human intelligence, right? Because we finally want to replicate it, which means we need to model it. And only when we model it can we replicate it on a computer. So on one hand, if you notice, the way human civilization has captured intelligence has been through computation. When do we call a child to be intelligent? When they can play chess, when they have a high IQ. These are all scenarios where a particular child can do a lot of computations in very little time. Can they multiply 5-digit numbers in a few seconds? They are called very intelligent because they can compute fast. If a person can play chess, they're called intelligent because they can compute fast, right? intelligence has always been confounded, so to speak, with computation, and no wonder the presence of GPUs and wide-scale compute has completely pushed artificial intelligence forward. But it may be also interesting to see this from how education has been looking at intelligence in the last few years, as it's not good to teach a child just one form of intelligence, but to look at it as multiple intelligences. I think that's a theory that's been considered in a lot of schools these days, where we are looking at musical intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, spatial intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, social intelligence, so on and so forth, right? I think maybe considering the view of AI to be much broader than just computation, I think is also very important to consider as we think about the future of AI. Just one last slide that I wanted to put together a few thoughts about considering all of this from an Indian context, right? What does it mean? What does all of this grand vision of AI mean in terms of imperatives, opportunities? I didn't want to talk about threats as an academic, because I do believe that when you develop technologies, you want to look at it more broadly in terms of its applications and rather bring in regulations and governance to handle threats. But in terms of the imperatives and opportunities, I see two ways of looking at it. One in terms of the vision itself, and the other in terms of the implementation. In terms of both of these, I feel strategization is very, very key. I mean, something that I don't think as a country we have done very well in terms of strategizing and envisioning something and having initiatives 10 years down, 5 years down, so on and so forth. I think from a vision perspective, on one hand, several of us spoke about this. There's one angle which is a catch-up angle, where we are already behind many other countries in developing foundation models. Maybe we should think about foundation models for not just India, but also the global south. But another angle to look at is also what are increasingly called SLMs, or small language models, not the large language models, but small language models that can fit into smaller form factors, that can be tailored to regional use cases, so on, or small multimodal models, SMMs, and of course, embedded AI. These are some things where I think, we need to invest efforts more as a catch-up. I think many other countries are well ahead of us in this space, but we definitely need to invest effort. But I think the more important thing to discuss is how do we leapfrog? I think we all know that the mobile revolution that we had in India was a leapfrogging step for the country. How do we do something in the AI context may be very, very important to discuss. I think AI agentification, in my opinion, is a very important direction for leapfrogging. It's only now that the research and technology space is investing a lot of effort, considering now that ChatGPT is a baseline, or Gemini or LLMs is generally a baseline. A tangible follow-up is that we could be looking at co-pilots, not just for coding or programming, but co-pilots for everything. When I book my flight tickets, I have a certain pattern of how I choose my flights. Why shouldn't I have a co-pilot do it for me by learning from my past patterns? Right? We probably are going to be looking at co-pilots for everything as we go forward, which I broadly can say is AI agentification. I think this is something that we as a country need to look going forward, is to how do we already develop companies and ecosystems to develop AI agents for various applications. Cognitive AI, obviously, I do think the future is going to be on the cognition side. Robotics, more because that's the action angle of the perception, cognition, action pipeline. AI as a service is something that we have excelled at in the past. I think a few speakers spoke about it too. And also interfaces with other technologies like quantum, embedded AI, various other aspects that we should be investing into. From an implementation perspective, I completely agree with everybody else who said that we need very proactive regulations and governance to handle the threats. This is something that probably we have not done very well in the past, and AI could be a very nice use case to consider proactive regulations and governance as we move forward. I also think that while the software development industry is so mature, right, we've had, tremendous success in the Indian context over the last couple of decades. AI, surprisingly, has not had a very rigorous workflow defined at this point in time. In software, for instance, we begin with user requirement specifications, we have test cases, we know how to validate the software, all of that is well defined as a workflow. Whereas in AI and machine learning at this point, a lot of the workflow is ad hoc. Right? You collect data, do something, then probably try to engineer an outcome, then validate, then come back and improve the system, so on and so forth. We don't start with participative design or user requirement specifications in AI. As AI becomes closer and closer to the human interface, if you want systems to be fair, if you want systems to be robust, if you want systems to be explainable, apart from being accurate and predicting well and so on and so forth, it's extremely important to first go for user requirement specifications to say, what does an application need? Does every application need fairness? Does every application need to be explainable? Does every application to be robust to all kinds of inputs? Obviously not, right? So which means we need a software development revolution to also get integrated into AI and have very clear workflows and standards for AI development, which by ourselves, I think could be something that India could bring to the table here. A couple of other broad thoughts is many other countries have centers of excellence with fixed lifetimes. They have very fixed lifetimes. They know that there's a center of excellence that's created whose lifetime is 5 years, and that's what it is. I think it's worthwhile considering such things for the country where we have centers of excellence in a consortium mode where academia, industry, government, NGO all come together with fixed lifetimes. I say that fixed lifetimes because today it could be AI. 5 years from now, we could be having a different topic or a different flavor of AI that we may need to discuss. So we may need COEs that have fixed lifetimes, after which we have a new COE which has a different flavor that addresses the need of those times. And we need to think about think tank COEs of this model, as well as implementation COEs that can do translational outcomes in this model too. And needless to say, my last point had to be that if we had to do all of this, I think we definitely need large amounts of compute clusters. I think that's what is taking a lot of the Western countries forward in the space of AI. I think that's a direction that we definitely need to. It's an imperative in the context of today's discussion. I think I'll stop there. Hopefully there was some useful inputs.
So thanks, Vinit, very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
You brought out a lot of interesting items in our history of AI and also things that India should be doing and India should be looking at. I think are very important. Now we are running really short on time. So what I will do is I will skip all my questions that I had. I will try to directly go to the audience, and we see if some of the questions are there from the audience. So Colonel Rai, are there any questions from the audience and that you have?
So there are two ways. One specific question is directed to Dr. Gupta, which I have pushed it on to him. And if there is any question, the audience are welcome to raise their hand through the bottom icon, which is there flashing in their respective WebEx utility, so that their name can pop up on the top.
Sure. So, okay. So Manish, you have a question directed to you. Can you see that?
Yeah. So I actually responded on chat.
Maybe you might also repeat the question and then just address it to the general audience.
So the question was, can an AI, whatever model, replace a human as a primary teacher? And Anand made that statement, right? That look, so rather than thinking of AI as replacing the humans, I think we should be really thinking about AI plus human. So in this case, the teacher utilizing AI can do a far better job than a teacher who doesn't make use of AI. So I think that's the right way in which both we should be developing and deploying technologies. And again, Dr. Chandrasekhar made that reference to how many organizations are kind of really trying to deploy AI more as a replacement for humans. But the right way to think of AI is as augmenting human capabilities to levels, right, that previously, in fact, we could not even imagine.
Okay, so I think you saw that you had replied. There's a question to Dr. Ganguly and Dr. Chandrasekhar. How can we detect offenses like violation of privacy or impersonation, and what can we do about that now? Any thoughts on that, RC?
Well, I think any violation, the whole concept of regulation and law centers around harm. So if harm is caused to an individual or a class of individuals, then obviously there is an affected party. And the challenge from a regulatory perspective is to ensure that the harm, when you trace it out, you are able to identify who the perpetrator is. And it can be very complicated in the digital world, as all of us know, because you have cloud, you have AI, you have tools, you have applications, and you have all sorts of security features, etc. So attributing liability is not as simple as it sounds, and that's where the regulation and in particular the provisions with regard to liability come in. So that's one aspect. I just wanted to add one thing, which is not apropos of this question, but generally, especially since you were suggesting that let's see if we can get something controversial. At the risk of raising eyebrows, I would say intelligence is overrated. All of us know that computers are in any case already more intelligent than most human beings, I mean AI, and the gap is only going to increase. But I think that's a very misleading comparison, because ultimately human beings are intelligence plus emotion. Whereas whatever emotions computers have today are only a result of either programming or data. The human emotion arises from physiology, which computers don't have. And I think this recognition of the difference in the combination of physiology and intelligence and emotion works is important, because computers wanting to take over the world is stuff of science fiction. But where does ambition, greed, envy, jealousy, where do all these things come from? They come from emotions which are related to the physiology. So I think somewhere, just as we have thought of many things, we have to start thinking of those aspects and then build it into the models, like what we are talking about, a teacher, and what does the actual teacher do when AI comes in. I just wanted to flag that as a thought.
No, so I think, I don't see any other questions coming up out here. It's almost 5:30. Maybe I'll ask a couple of questions which are very generic, and partly it relates to the last thing that you were asking. What I sometimes feel is that two things, we have seen disruptive technologies since the advent of Industrial Revolution. Okay. So why are we suddenly so afraid of this disruptive technology called AI? Okay, and everybody is like all charged up in one way or the other. Europe is actually going paranoid, in my opinion. The regulations that they're putting in is literally saying that just don't do anything, or if you do everything, all the source code, everything should be known to us. I'm exaggerating it. US is far softer on it. India is trying to, in some sense, replicate. So is this fear of AI a cooked up fear, a sort of created fear by both academicians, technologists, social scientists, economists, regulators, since everybody is here, I'm trying to include, or is it something genuine?
If you're saying, is this Y2K? You're probably right.
No, is this really like Y2K came in? No, nothing happened. So I'm thinking, is this really
That's
genuine?
If that's what you're asking, you're probably right.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I think Y2K was a great thing. I mean, all of us was worried that the world is going to stop revolving. Okay, but nothing happened. Everything moved along well. So what are your opinions, given the expertise that you have, much more than I have, and you're all right deep into it? Do you really think is the fear justified, or unnecessarily like created this fear perception? Manish, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, if you really look at, AI is definitely a lot more powerful than many of these technology, right, that we have seen. So yes, put to good use. I mean, if you think about, I think Rohini referred to this AlphaFold, right? The applying AI to uncover the structure of a protein. It used to take like a person an entire PhD, 5 years, to uncover the structure of a single protein, and 200 million proteins, kind of their structure, were made available through this AlphaFold model, right? So 1 billion years of PhD equivalent work was done. So that's the potential in terms of positive potential for now drug discovery and so on. But now imagine deploying that power, right, towards deploying weapons that kill people. You equip those drones with all of these killer technologies and so on, right, and wipe out people, whatever that maybe the algorithm decides, right, should not exist on the planet and so on. So I think there is, it is an extremely, and it is shaping up, right, as we move towards artificial general intelligence, it is actually shaping up to be an extremely powerful technology. Yeah. So I think if really like applied, right, towards harmful, kind of towards causing harm, it can indeed do a lot of harm. So that's one side. The other is that we are in this very I think this is a very unparalleled situation where on one hand, these models are amazingly powerful. On the other hand, there are still open issues things like hallucination, things like fairness and so on, right? The same models that you're utilizing to kind of, in fact, meet your information needs. On one hand, and I showed that Gemini example, I mean, amazingly powerful capabilities. On the other hand, they can make such simple kind of basic mistakes. I think this kind of duality is again, I think, unparalleled. So naturally, there is concern that you can take this very powerful technology, and if you're not careful and simply deploy it, kind of believing in it, it can cause tremendous harm. So I think there are also legitimate concerns about deploying it responsibly. Yes, I mean, I don't believe, yes, I mean, in doomsday, like, oh, we are headed for whatever the scenario where suddenly a rogue AI agent is going to just take over and kind of start destroying the entire world. Yes, that's too much of a maybe doomsday scenario, but I think the basic concerns are well founded, and we need a lot more progress on being able to develop and deploy AI in a more responsible manner.
Okay, so before I know RC and Subhash has their hands up, but one of the audience, Professor Dibakar Sen, he has raised his hand. So, Professor Dibakar, if you can unmute yourself and ask the question, please. Colonel, can he unmute himself? He is muted right now. Or can you unmute Professor Dibakar Sen? Okay, Professor Dibakar Sen, I think you are unmuted. Please go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, my question, not to a particular speaker, is that I don't work in this area, but I get an impression that these kind of advanced AI systems require huge computational power. Because of that, right, does it not pose a challenge to democratization of this technology? Because everyone cannot have very high computational power by their side, and in turn it may lead to monopolization into people having that technology. Like, say, Google has got very large capability to do that, whereas another such company may be dependent on that. So what is the dependence of the computational power with the algorithmic complexity?
Yeah, so I think we have both Google and Microsoft, the two giants out here. So I think this is something that they will have to tackle. So.
No, I'll say two things. I mean, look, ultimately, there's also a lot of innovation happening. A lot of these technologies.
No, but I think, Manish, sorry, but I think this is a genuine question which I also normally ask, because not everybody is going to have whatever. Not just petaflops, but exaflop machines, I mean, but that is a capability which Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, others will have it. Even academic institutions like Stanford may not be able to afford that. So how is this going to fan out, the whole thing? It's a little uncertain even as an academician.
So one of the things I'm pointing out is there's a lot of technology, advanced technology available in open source. So in fact, so one is that. The other is there's also going to be innovation at some point, right? Scaling alone, right, will not solve the problem. Ultimately, you have to come up with better ways of more efficiently tackling these problems than simply throwing more and more compute at it. So that's another area where academicians have a very, very strong role to play. And of course, as a practical matter, I mean, once you have access to these models, right, that, okay, somebody has invested in it. I mean, and the good news here is there are also a lot of startups based in India, which are beginning to develop some of these models and in fact, train some of these models from scratch. And in fact, we have been making, in fact, compute resources available to some of these startups. So I think there is going to be also progress in terms of Indian startups and Indian organizations beginning to kind of pre-train and develop such models. But in any case, once you have access to those models, you can utilize that power, right, in as well as anybody else, right, who kind of built those models.
Okay, I think You want to take a shot at it, Rohini, or there's
Yeah,
another
just
question?
I just wanted to add to what Manish said. I think he made many important points. I think couple of things, right? One is that this technology, at least the large language models which we seem to be focusing on, they need a lot more power hungry. They are much more power hungry during the training phase. At the inference phase, which is where, and I think the mindset for people is to then think about what can you do with that kind of technology in terms of solving problems. Like Nandan recently had a session to say India will become the world leader in terms of use cases of AI, which is an important element to remember. You have to actually solve problems. That's one. Second is there is a lot of research and across the world on small language models, because the models which can then be trained using very specific data for specific tasks. They don't have to be general purpose. Third is, I think, from a academic perspective, I think it is, while we have gone down this path of a particular architecture, I think there are innovations which we are not even aware of, which are going to follow very different paths to intelligence. And I think that area, and one name, for example, neuromorphic computing. I think there are certain things which are possibly have got potential that we are undercutting at this point because we are all in this hype of large language model. Those, I think, to me, and finally, at the end of the day, any technology follows that Moore's law of exponentially going down in prices, right? So I think some of these we have to remember as the longer term trend for how to think about this.
Great, thank you. I'll go to Indranil. Indranil, you have a question? You have raised your hand.
Well, Uday, I wrote a comment and you possibly are busy and you didn't notice that. My request to all the panelists is that this is an extremely rich discussion. Aini would like to create sort of excerpts of the comments and predictions made by the panelists, and we'll run it through them. And if they kindly give their permission, then we would like to create sort of a proceedings or a monograph out of that. And well, I had a couple of other questions, but that's all I wanted to. No, there's no time. So on behalf of the Academy, I would like to again thank each one of the panelists and you, Uday, profuse. Sure. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much. I think there are some more questions. We'll leave it at that. But I think what Professor Manna mentioned, and you can add a few other things. Will it be possible? I think if you can kind of create some write-up from your side, I'll keep pestering you. That is something, and we have Colonel to help me out for the pestering job. That's not a difficult thing to do. I think it'll be nice to come up something from Aini's side. And this is, the reason I'm more anxious is that I had proposed this when I was a member of the council, which is probably 6 years ago or 7 years ago. That look, we need to do this, and it kept on getting postponed for one reason or the other. Now that we have all of you and a varied perspective, we may get some more people also. If you have any suggestions, we may also include them and create some kind of a more of a edited monograph, and with a preface with some recommendations for India, because a lot of suggestions came forward as to, what is it that India should focus on. People may disagree, which is fine. Disagreement is part and parcel of the educative process and learning process. So I hope you'll be able to, help us with that. I'm assuming silence is yes, usually. So I'm assuming the answer is yes. Nobody has vehemently said no. So I'm assuming the answer is yes. Okay. Maybe we'll take help from Center for Digital Futures also. It could be a collaborative effort. I am open to that. I hope Professor Manna will also agree to that. Shouldn't be a problem. Yeah.
Uday, it's interesting. Occasionally you Center for the Digital Future and occasionally the plural. I'm not referring to the many futures or the many universes. Your name is only Center for the Digital Future.
Future, not futures. Okay, future.
And actually, as an economist, futures has a completely different meaning.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So I think we'll conclude.
But can I say one thing, Uday?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. You will have the last word.
One thing. That the difference between the disruptive technologies that happened earlier and AI is the speed.
I see.
That's the only thing. Other than that, we have lived with disruptive technologies, throughout our history. But it's that speed which is the fear.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, Vineet had a hand up, and I'm just letting everybody.
I just had to say it because of the last point about the speed. I think one of the most understated reasons why AI has exploded in the last 10 years is open science. I think people put models openly on GitHub. People put papers openly on archive, which led to what could take 6 months to 1 year for somebody to replicate to 1 day. I think this is perhaps an understated reason, in my opinion, for the explosion of AI. It's just the open science aspect that has, took off in the last 10 years, especially in the community. I think it's a very important thing to at least keep going.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
I
Completely
mean,
agree.
great for research, the open science. Okay, so I think it's, we have taken almost 15 minutes more than what we had planned. It's 5:45. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll keep after you guys to get something out. I think it's important that the larger group, we had about 80 people at one time logged in. I think now there are about 50 who have logged in. But the message that you have conveyed and the points that you have conveyed, I think it's important that a much larger group of people listen to it, both at the policymakers as well as the business people, the scientists, the economists, everybody. So I really appreciate your help in this matter. And I think with Professor, with Indrajit support also, I think we'll be after you guys. Okay, thank you so much. Have a nice weekend.